A terrified young woman climbed into a stranger's wagon and whispered, "Please pretend I'm your wife." But when the men searching for her looked closer, what did they notice that nearly exposed them both? The horses behind him never broke into a gallop. They simply kept coming. Elias tightened the reins as a frightened woman pulled his coat over her wedding dress, trying to hide the cream-colored shoes peeking beneath the blanket. Hooves echoed across the frozen road, and someone called his name from behind. Why would one quiet lie force two strangers onto the most dangerous road in Wyoming? If you enjoy heartfelt frontier stories, come ride with me. By late October, Red Willow had taken on the hard, watchful look of a town waiting for winter. Wagon wheels ground over the packed main street. Wind pushed dust beneath the boardwalks and rattled the tin sign above the mercantile. Elias Ward had been there 3 hours, which was nearly 2 hours longer than he liked. He loaded flour, coffee, salt pork, lamp oil, ammunition, 4 winter blankets, a new axe handle, harness fittings, and a bottle of liniment for the injured mare waiting at Ward Ranch. Each item had its place. Elias tied the final rope, tested the knot, then tested it again. Across the street, 2 brothers argued over a broken harness. For one moment, Elias saw Nathan beside him instead. His older brother had always believed any damaged thing could be saved if a man had patience and the right tools. Nathan had been dead 4 years. Elias pulled the knot tighter and turned away. Something felt wrong in Red Willow. Men stood outside the feed store without speaking. 2 women came down the steps of Reverend Cole's church carrying pale flowers, neither looking at the other. A black carriage waited beside Pike's freight office. 3 saddled horses stood beneath the mercantile awning. Elias asked no questions. Towns often said more through silence than gossip. He climbed onto the wagon box and reached for the reins. Something shifted behind him. Not flour settling, not a loose crate. Elias stepped down and walked around to the rear. He lifted the canvas. A young black woman sat between the flour sacks and folded blankets, knees drawn close, a small travel bag pressed against her chest. Dark curls had slipped from their pins. Mud marked the hem of her rose-colored dress. Cream-buttoned shoes showed beneath the skirt. Fine shoes, made for a church aisle, not a supply wagon. A shallow cut crossed her palm. She looked at Elias, then passed him toward the north end of the street. Hooves struck the hard ground. 3 riders were coming fast enough to be noticed, slow enough to search. The woman leaned toward him. "Please pretend I'm your wife," she whispered, "just until we're out of town." Elias looked at the mud on her dress, the blood drying across her hand, and the men wearing Ambrose Pike's colors. He did not know her name. He did not know whether she had done wrong, but free people did not hide beneath flour sacks. "Lie flat," he said. "Pull the gray blanket over you." She obeyed without another word. Elias closed the canvas and returned to the front. The riders reached him before the wagon had gone 20 yards. Their leader drew alongside. "You seen a young woman? Dark hair, pink dress." "My wife's in the back," Elias said. "Road made her sick." The rider leaned toward the canvas. Before Elias could stop him, the flap opened. The woman looked out with flushed cheeks and tired impatience. Her eyes dropped briefly to the name burned into the wagon box. "Elias," she said, "did you put the medicine beneath the seat, or did you forget it again?" "Beneath the coffee." She turned to the rider. "If you're finished, I would prefer not to be sick in the middle of Red Willow." The rider almost smiled. Then he saw her shoes. Fine footwear for a mountain road. "We attended a family service," Elias said. "Which church?" "Reverend Cole's." One of the men glanced back toward the pale flowers on the church steps. Elias flicked the reins. The horse moved, and the wagon rolled forward before the rider decided whether another question was worth asking. For 30 seconds, only the wheels followed them. Then came Hooves, not chasing, following. At the feed store corner, Elias hauled the wagon onto the abandoned mill road. The wheels dropped into deep ruts. Mud struck the boards. Behind them, Pike's riders continued at the same patient pace. The woman climbed onto the box beside him. "They'll send men to the Eastern Pass. That's why we're not taking it." The rear wheels sank into a washout. Elias jumped down and braced his shoulder against the wagon. Before he could speak, she was beside him, wedging a flat stone beneath the wheel. Her cream shoe split along the side. She looked at it once, tore off her bright shawl, and climbed back up. Elias handed her his dark coat. They crossed a ridge above the main road. Below them, riders moved between the aspens, searching the eastern trail. One man looked toward the sound of their wagon. The woman lowered her head beneath Elias's coat. Elias kept the horse steady. A sudden burst of speed would betray them. The rider disappeared among the trees. Only then did Elias urge the team forward. Red Willow faded behind the hills. "What is your name?" he asked. "Rosemary Bell." "Are they following because you harmed someone?" Her fingers closed around the torn edge of her shoe. "No," she said. "They're following because I refused to belong to one." The wedding had been planned for that afternoon at Pike Ranch. Ambrose Pike had offered to erase her dead mother's debts if Rosemary married him. But the debt had been built like a trap. Her mother, Lillian Bell, had owned a narrow piece of ground south of town where Willow Creek crossed between Pike's properties. Without that parcel, he could not control the water running toward his northern range. He had lent Lillian money through 2 hard winters, then changed the interest, buried payments, and waited until she died. Sarah Wren, Lillian's old friend, had found proof in a letter from Pike to a Cheyenne creditor. She copied it, dressed Rosemary for the wedding as though nothing were wrong, then led her through the back of the sewing room. Elias's wagon had been the only one leaving east. "My brother studied law," Elias said. "A debt cannot take land unless the land was properly named as security." Rosemary looked at him. "Will that matter in Red Willow?" "Maybe not in Red Willow." He looked toward the mountains, "but it may matter to a territorial marshal." Dark clouds had swallowed the northern peaks. The temperature was falling fast. Far behind them, a single rider appeared on the ridge. Then the first snowflake struck the wagon seat between them. Elias looked north. The clouds had dropped low enough to erase the peaks. Wind came through the mountain cut in a sudden cold sheet, lifting Rosemary's loose curls and sending yellow aspen leaves skittering across the road. "We won't make the ranch before dark," he said. Rosemary pulled his coat tighter around herself. "Then where?" "There's a line cabin below Granite Ridge." The snow thickened before they reached the turn. Within half an hour, the old mill road had become a pale ribbon between dark trees. The horse lowered its head against the wind. Elias leaned forward over the reins, guiding by memory more than sight. At a frozen wash, the wagon slid sideways. Rosemary was down before he told her to move. She took the horse near the bridle while Elias braced one shoulder beneath the wagon bed. The rear wheel climbed the icy rut, dropped hard, then caught. They reached the cabin near sundown. It was a single-room shelter tucked beneath a granite shelf, with a stone chimney, 1 bunk, a rough table, and dry wood stacked under the eaves. Elias got the horse beneath the lean-to. When he came inside, Rosemary had already carried in flour, salt pork, coffee, and 2 blankets. He built the fire. She cut the pork. Neither wasted words. Soon their wet clothing steamed near the hearth. Rosemary's cream wedding shoes rested beside the stones, stained brown and split at one seam. They ate from the same iron pan because the cabin held only 1 plate. Elias gave her the chair and sat on an overturned wood box. Rosemary watched him for a while. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not asking everything at once." He looked toward the fire. "My mother used to say the right person asks the right question at the right time." "What was the right question?" "She never told me. Said a good person would know when it came." Elias studied the pan between them. "Did you eat before you ran?" Rosemary went still. "No." He pushed the larger portion toward her. She almost refused. He could see the habit rise in her face before she lowered her eyes and began to eat. After a moment, Elias said, "You were fortunate you found my wagon. My cooking might have sent you back." A smile touched her mouth, uncertain at first, then real. It changed her whole face. Elias looked into the fire until he trusted his own expression again. That night, he gave her the bunk and laid one blanket near the hearth. Wind struck the cabin walls in long, heavy gusts. Rosemary woke after midnight. Elias was still awake. "Do you think Pike will cross the mountains after me?" "He spent years arranging that land," Elias said. "Men like him don't surrender because one afternoon went wrong." She looked toward the shuttered window. "I've spent most of my life being watched." "The mountains don't watch anyone," he said. "They just remain." By morning, the storm had weakened. They reached Ward Ranch near noon. The house stood in a wide, white valley beneath the northern ridges. It was larger than Rosemary expected, solidly built, with a long porch and 2 chairs, though only one showed regular use. The barn roof was clean of loose shingles. Split wood stood stacked by size. The winter garden had been banked with straw. Everything had been cared for. Nothing had been changed. Inside, Elias showed her a second bedroom. A coat hung behind the door. 2 worn law books sat on the shelf. "My brother's room," he said. Rosemary set her bag on the chair. "I'm sorry. 4 years." She did not ask for more. "I'll pay for my food and shelter," she said. "You don't need to." "I do." Her voice stayed calm, but her hand tightened around the bag. "I won't leave one man's debt only to live beneath another man's kindness." Elias understood. "The room is yours. The door locks from inside. I won't enter unless you ask. Food is shared through winter. Work beyond the house is paid. When the past opens, I'll take you wherever you choose." Rosemary held his gaze. "All right." The next thing, she examined the injured mare in the east stall. Elias had been treating the left foreleg, but Rosemary noticed the animal kept shifting away from one raised plank beneath the bedding. "Lift the hoof," she said. He did. Their shoulders touched in the narrow stall. Elias tightened his hand on the lead rope, but did not move away too quickly. Rosemary checked the tendon, then pointed to the floor. "She isn't only favoring the leg, she's avoiding that board." Together they removed it, reset the bedding, and wrapped the mare's leg. "My grandfather kept horses on the creek parcel," Rosemary said. "I spent summers there." Elias followed her instructions without argument. She noticed. By November 2nd, the pass was closed. Elias returned from the lower trail with snow on his shoulders and silence in his face. He set his hat beside the stove. Rosemary looked at him once and understood. Winter found its rhythm. He fed cattle before dawn. She checked the mare and the supplies. They broke ice from the troughs, mended harness leather, repaired fence braces, and took turns starting supper. One morning, Elias left a note beside the coffee pot. "Mare stays inside. Wind turning afternoon." Rosemary wrote beneath it. "Her leg is cooler. Your right glove is split. Leave it by the stove." The next morning, the glove was repaired. The notes remained on the table. Weeks later, Elias found the torn curtains in Nathan's room neatly mended. His face closed before he could stop it. Rosemary saw. "I can take them down." "Nathan chose that cloth," he said. "So, he thought I'd marry someday. Thought this room would be used." "I didn't mean to erase him." Elias ran his thumb along the repaired seam. "You didn't erase it," he said. "You stopped it from coming apart." That evening, he sat in the barn, listening to the mare breathe. Inside the house, lamplight glowed beneath Rosemary's door. For the first time in 4 years, Ward Ranch did not sound empty. The following morning, Elias found hoofprints near the lower boundary. One horse had stopped on the ridge long enough to watch the house. He returned without mentioning them. Rosemary stood at the kitchen window. Her mother's ledger lay open beside the Bible. I saw the tracks, she said. Outside, the wind began filling them with snow. Elias looked toward the window. One rider. He stopped on the ridge. Pikes? Most likely. Rosemary closed her mother's ledger and rested both hands on the cover. He knows where I am. He knows where the ranch is, Elias said. That is not the same as having the right to enter it. The distinction mattered. She could tell he meant it. December settled hard over the valley. Snow climbed the barn walls and buried the lower fence rails. The road vanished beneath a white sweep broken only by hoofprints, sled runners, and the narrow path Elias shoveled between the house and cattle yard. The ranch became the small world of smoke, timber, livestock, and weather. Rosemary learned where the north wind slipped through the kitchen frame. Elias learned she drank coffee strong, but added a spoonful of molasses when she thought he was not watching. The mare improved. Each morning, Rosemary walked her in slow circles through the barn aisle. One gray afternoon, the animal placed full weight on the injured leg and broke into a brief, clean trot. Rosemary laughed. Elias smiled from the doorway before he remembered he had not meant to. She saw. Neither mentioned it at supper. Their notes continued. North fence drifted over. I cleared the porch. Do not use the loose step. Coffee is on the stove. You came in after midnight. Eat before you ride again. One morning, Rosemary found an older note folded beneath Elias's gloves. The paper had softened at the creases from being carried in his coat. She put it back exactly where she found it. The frozen trough failed 3 nights before Christmas. The cattle crowded the fence, breathing steam into the dark. Elias took an iron bar to the ice near the bank. The crust beneath his boots gave way. He fell hard, one shoulder striking the edge as freezing water closed around his legs. Rosemary heard the cattle bawling and ran from the house in Elias's coat, her boots unlaced. She looped a rope around the fence post and threw him the other end. Hold it. I can climb. You can argue when you're out. He caught the rope. She leaned back with both heels dug into the snow until he reached solid ground. His shoulder hung wrong, though the joint remained in place. The cattle still need water, he said through clenched teeth. Rosemary looked at the frozen trough, then at him. Pride will not thaw it. She heated stones in the stove, carried them out in an iron bucket, and lowered them against the ice. Elias worked one-handed with the bar. They hauled water from the spring house and released the cattle in smaller groups. By dawn, Rosemary's palms were blistered, and Elias's lips had gone pale with cold. At last, dark water moved beneath the broken ice. The cattle lowered their heads and drank. Elias stood beside Rosemary in the gray morning. You were right in October, he said. The ranch runs better with 2. She watched steam rise from the trough. Most things do when both are allowed to stand. Inside, Rosemary wrapped his shoulder. He held a strip of cloth between his teeth while she tightened the bandage. When she finished, they were closer than either had expected. Her fingers rested briefly against his shirt. Elias looked at her, saw Rosemary stepped back first. Thank you, he said. He did not pretend the moment had been nothing. At Christmas, Rosemary made a small cake from flour, preserved apples, and molasses. Elias placed a pair of sturdy brown boots beside her plate. She frowned at them. Those cost too much. He opened the ranch ledger and showed her the wages he had recorded for her work. She read the figures. You undervalued the harness repairs. Then correct it. She did. Later, she handed him his winter gloves. The torn leather had been reinforced, and his initials were sewn inside. These are not wages, she said. What are they? Something I wanted you to have. Elias had no answer ready. He wore them the next morning. Tom Henderson arrived in January on a horse white with sweat and frost. He carried a folded notice from Red Willow. Pike had filed statements claiming Rosemary had been abducted, that grief had left her unable to manage her inheritance, and that Elias Ward was preventing her lawful return. Rosemary read the page twice. "He could not make me obey," she said. "So now he says I cannot choose." Elias folded the notice. "You can stay with Tom's family if you feel safer." Her eyes lifted sharply. "Do you want me gone?" "No." The answer came without delay. "But safety cannot mean I make your decisions in Pike's place." Rosemary looked toward the window where the valley lay white and open. "I ran because I had no ground to stand on," she said. "I have ground now." Tom brought another letter 2 weeks later. It had traveled by winter rider along the Southern Valley Road. Sarah Wren wrote that Pike had searched her sewing room. Reverend Cole had signed a statement describing Rosemary's fear before the wedding. A copy of Pike's letter had been sent to a territorial marshal. Pike knew evidence existed. He did not know how many copies remained. Rosemary stood beside the stove for a long moment. Then she reached inside the collar of her dress and drew out a folded paper worn soft from being carried against her skin. "This is the original," she said. "His instructions are in the margin." Elias did not take it immediately. "You kept it all winter." "I did not know whether a man who understood its value might trade it for something he wanted." The words hurt him. She saw that, but he held out his hand. "You did not owe me trust before I earned it." Rosemary placed the letter in his palm. That night, they spread Nathan's law books, Lillian's ledger, Pike's debt statement, and the creditor's letter across the kitchen table. Rosemary noticed 2 shades of ink in the totals. Elias matched missing payments to dates in her mother's ledger. They copied everything by hand. 1 packet went to Tom. Another disappeared inside Nathan's largest law book. Rosemary kept the original. Working past midnight, she asked why Elias had never left Ward Ranch after Nathan died. "It was the last unfinished thing we shared," he said. "Leaving felt like abandoning him." "Would living differently do the same?" Elias looked toward Nathan's repaired curtains. "I don't know." "The dead do not need rooms kept untouched," Rosemary said quietly. "The living do." He did not answer. He sat with it. The following afternoon, Elias spotted a rider on the North Ridge. By the time he reached the rise, the man was gone. Only cigar ash remained in the snow, dark and fresh. Pike imported that brand from Cheyenne. Elias sent word to Tom. The Harrove brothers agreed to watch the pass road. If 6 or more riders crossed the valley, they would come as witnesses. One evening, Elias stood beside the table while Rosemary tied the copied papers with string. "If this ends," he began, "there is something I need to—" The barn dog growled. They stepped onto the porch. Moonlight lay across the lower boundary. 6 parallel lines of hoofprints cut through the snow, stopped within sight of the house, and turned back toward the pass. At sunrise, dark shapes appeared beyond the North Ridge. Pike had stopped watching from a distance. The dog barked once, then again, lower this time. Elias was in the barn fitting a valve when the riders came through the cottonwoods. 6 men, Ambrose Pike at the center in a dark buffalo coat, his hat low against the glare. Elias set his tools on the bench. His shoulder still pulled in the cold, but he did not favor it as he crossed the yard. He removed his gloves and laid them on the fence rail. Pike stopped 20 feet away. "Ward." "Pike, I believe you have something that belongs to me." "The cattle are branded Ward." Pike's mouth tightened. "I mean Rosemary Bell." The house door opened. Rosemary stepped onto the porch wearing the brown winter boots Elias had bought from her wages. Her rose-colored wedding dress was long gone. She wore a plain wool skirt, a heavy coat, and her mother's letter hidden close against her. Pike looked at her as if the months between October and February had been a misunderstanding he intended to correct. "Rosemary," he said gently, "come down." She stayed where she was. He spoke of forgiveness, of protecting Lillian Bell's name, of preventing Elias from facing an abduction charge. He promised the property would not be taken publicly if she returned without another scene. Rosemary waited until he finished. Then she descended the steps and stood beside Elias. Pike looked at him. This does not concern you. Anything happening on Ward land concerns me. She can answer for herself. Elias shifted half a step, leaving the space open. Rosemary met Pike's eyes. I answered when I ran. You were frightened. Grief makes people confused. You have spent 4 months calling every choice I make an illness. Pike drew a folded document from his coat. A local clerk's seal showed at the bottom. This authorizes the recovery of disputed estate property and her return for examination. Elias studied it without reaching. Signed by a marshal? Local authority is sufficient. Then why did you bring riders instead of officers? The 2 men nearest Pike moved forward. Elias stepped between them and Rosemary. He still did not draw. Her hand touched the back of his coat. Lightly, not hiding, letting him know she was still there. A voice came from the road. He isn't standing alone. Tom Henderson rode through the gate. Caleb and Owen Harrive followed, stopping near the property line. Pike turned in the saddle. Tom nodded toward the papers. Saw your men cross Ward land without permission. Thought witnesses might be useful. This is private business. Caleb Harrive looked toward Rosemary. Not if it concerns the creek feeding half the lower valley. Rosemary reached inside her coat. The paper she withdrew had been folded so often, the creases had gone soft. Pike's face changed before she opened it. Rosemary saw. So did Elias. She read the letter aloud. Pike's instructions to the Cheyenne creditor were plain. Show Lillian Bell a manageable rate. Collect a higher rate through private adjustments. Delay enforcement while she remained alive. Pressure the heir before she obtained counsel. Secure the creek parcel through marriage if direct seizure caused resistance. When Rosemary finished, only the horses moved. Pike laughed once without humor. Stolen, altered. A seamstress has no understanding of financial records. Rosemary opened her mother's ledger. A seamstress survives by measuring what powerful men assume she cannot count. She pointed to payments missing from Pike's statement, then to the totals written in 2 shades of ink. Sarah Wren has a copy of your letter. Reverend Cole signed a statement. Tom has the ledger pages. Another packet is on its way to the territorial marshal. Tom tapped the inside of his coat. If you take the paper from me, Rosemary said, the others remain. If I disappear, you will be the first man they question. One of Pike's riders looked toward him. You said this was debt collection. It is. Looks more like removing a witness. Pike's voice hardened. Hold your place. Another rider shifted his horse away from Rosemary. The line was breaking. Pike pointed toward her. Take her. No one moved. I gave an order. A rider near the rear shook his head. I was hired to collect cattle, not drag a woman away in front of witnesses. Pike's hand disappeared beneath his coat. Elias kept his own hand near the revolver at his hip. You can leave with men knowing what you did, he said, or reach for that gun and leave the truth written in the snow. Caleb and Owen separated, widening their positions. Rosemary stood without retreating, the letter raised in one gloved hand. Pike looked at his riders. None would make the first move. The evidence existed in too many places. The witnesses had heard too much. Violence could no longer return the matter to secrecy. His hand came away from the coat. This is not finished. Rosemary folded the letter. It ended the day I stopped believing your money was the same thing as law. Pike turned his horse. His men followed, but not together. One rode ahead. 2 dropped far behind. By the time they disappeared through the cottonwoods, they no longer looked like Pike's men. They looked like 6 riders choosing separate roads. No one cheered. Wind pushed loose snow across their tracks. Rosemary's hand began shaking only after they were gone. Elias looked at her. Are you hurt? No. She folded the letter carefully, though her fingers would not stay still. Tom asked whether he should remain. Rosemary looked at Elias, then back at the road. "We're safe." Tom nodded. He and the Hooves left slowly, watching the ridge until it disappeared behind them. The yard became ordinary again. Rosemary asked, "Will the evidence hold?" "There are too many copies now," Elias said. "No clerk can bury all of them." He went to the cattle yard. For a moment, Rosemary thought he was avoiding her. Then she saw the way he rested one hand on the gate before opening it. He needed something ordinary. Inside, she placed Lillian's Bible beside the ledger. That evening, supper passed mostly in silence. Elias washed the dishes and sat across from her. "The pass will open in April," he said. "When the marshal clears the title, I can take you back to Red Willow. Or Cheyenne. Anywhere you choose." Rosemary held the Bible between both hands. "Is that what you want?" Elias looked at the bundle of winter notes tied with string near the coffee cup. "I can take you anywhere," he said. "I just don't know how I'd come back to this house if you weren't in it." Rosemary was still for a long moment. Then she pointed toward Nathan's room. "I repaired those curtains. I know. I know where the barn wall leaks. I know the mare's feeding hour. My boots stand beside yours. My handwriting has been on this table for 4 months." Elias looked at her. "I did those things because I live here." He said nothing. She repeated it more quietly. "I live here, Elias." He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers where it rested on Lillian's Bible. "Yes," he said. "You do." Neither of them spoke again for a while. The fire settled into glowing coals. Outside, February held the valley in white silence. Inside, nothing had been promised beyond that simple answer. Yet something lasting had quietly begun. Life refused to pause for it. The cattle still needed feeding before daylight. Another trough froze the following week. A late calf struggled through a bitter night before standing on uncertain legs at sunrise. Rosemary still left notes beside the coffee pot. "Northgate hinge needs oil. Garden seed should be ordered before spring. Coffee is still too strong." Elias always answered beneath them. "Gate fixed. Seed list on the shelf. Coffee stays." The distance between their chairs grew smaller without either of them noticing when it happened. Early in March, Tom Henderson rode into the yard carrying news from Red Willow. The territorial marshal had arrived. Sarah Wren's packet had reached him safely. Reverend Cole's statement had been accepted. Merchants had begun producing their own account books, showing the same pattern of hidden interest and altered figures. Pike's scheme was no longer Rosemary's burden alone. It had become the county's. A week later, another writer brought fresh word. Ambrose Pike had tried to burn records inside his freight office before leaving town. The fire had been stopped before the building was lost. A clerk escaped with ledgers naming several families whose debts had been manipulated in the same way. Pike himself had disappeared south before officers reached him. People called it an escape. Elias called it a man running, because paper had finally become heavier than money. By late April, enough snow had melted for horses to cross the pass. Rosemary and Elias rode to Red Willow with Tom. The same streets looked different now. She entered openly, no blanket hiding her face, no hurried glance over her shoulder. Sarah Wren waited inside the sewing shop. For a heartbeat, neither woman moved. Then Sarah opened her arms just enough to let Rosemary choose. Rosemary stepped forward. The embrace lasted only a moment. It was enough. "My mother knew," Rosemary whispered. Sarah nodded. Toward the end, she began keeping her own records because she feared no one would believe her later. Tears filled Rosemary's eyes but did not fall. The hearing took place in the county office rather than a courtroom. The territorial marshal sat beside a land clerk. Reverend Cole, Tom, Sarah Wren, and several neighboring ranchers waited quietly. Rosemary answered every question herself. She described the loans, the altered interest, the missing payments, the forced marriage, her escape, the confrontation at Ward Ranch. When questions turned toward her, Elias remained silent. She needed no one to speak for her. Late that afternoon, the marshal laid the corrected deed upon the desk. The Willow Creek parcel is restored to its lawful owner. The paper carried only one name, Rosemary Bell. She rested one finger lightly across the fresh ink. Elias watched from the back of the room. Only after that moment did he allow himself to imagine a future. A land broker approached before they left town. He offered enough money for the creek parcel to buy a comfortable house in Cheyenne. Rosemary listened politely. Then she declined. No one should own every drop of water running through this valley. Instead, she drew up simple written agreements, allowing neighboring ranches fair seasonal access to the creek. Tom signed one. The Hooves brothers signed another. Sarah Wren kept duplicate copies inside her sewing shop. The land Pike had tried to control became protection against another man ever doing the same. Back at Ward Ranch, Elias found Rosemary carrying a small trunk into the hallway. For one terrible moment, he believed she had decided to leave. He walked quietly toward the wagon outside. "I'll harness the team." Rosemary looked up. "What for? You said I'd take you anywhere." She smiled gently and opened the trunk. Nathan's law books rested inside, wrapped in clean cloth. "I'm moving them downstairs," he stared. "So, the room shouldn't stay waiting forever." Relief crossed his face so quickly that Rosemary reached for his hand without thinking. Weeks later, they rode together to the old line cabin where the storm had first driven them. Snowmelt dripped from the roof. Beneath the bunk lay one ruined cream wedding shoe. Rosemary picked it up. The torn leather had hardened through the winter. She smiled softly and placed it back beneath the bed. "She can stay here." "Who?" "The woman who kept planning her escape." They stood outside overlooking the valley. After a long silence, Elias spoke about Nathan. "My brother built the larger house because he believed life grows." Rosemary slipped her arm through his. "It has." Elias reached into his coat and removed a plain silver ring. It had belonged to his mother. "I won't ask because you need my roof," he said quietly, "or because you owe me anything." He looked directly into her eyes. "Will you stay as my wife because that's where your heart has already gone?" Rosemary looked toward the valley below. She had land, she had legal title, she had choices. Then she looked back at him. "I stayed before you asked." She accepted the ring. Before they returned home, she made 4 requests. Her creek land would remain in her own name. Major ranch decisions would belong to both of them. Sarah Wren would always keep duplicate records. Nathan's memory would remain part of the house. Elias agreed to each one before she finished speaking. "I have one condition," she laughed. "What is it?" "When my coffee is terrible, tell me. I've been telling you since November." In May, they returned to Red Willow in the same wagon. This time, Rosemary sat beside Elias instead of hiding beneath the blankets. Her cream wedding dress rested carefully folded behind them, beside garden seeds, coffee, and supplies for home. Reverend Cole married them in the little church. Sarah Wren held Lillian's Bible. Tom and the Hooves brothers filled the front pew. When Reverend Cole asked whether Rosemary entered freely, her answer carried through every corner of the room. "I do." After the ceremony, they stopped beside Willow Creek. A simple wooden marker stood near the water. Lillian Bell and Rosemary Bell. The current moved quietly around the posts. At Ward Ranch that evening, Rosemary placed the restored deed inside one of Nathan's law books. Elias set their wedding photograph beside it. Near the stove stood 2 pairs of worn boots. On the kitchen table, Rosemary left one last familiar note. "Creek agreements filed. North garden needs turning. Coffee is poor." Elias picked up the pencil. "The first 2 are true." She laughed from the next room. He followed the sound without hurry. Months earlier, she had hidden beneath his blankets because she needed one road leading away from fear. Now every road lay open before her. She chose the one that led home. Sometimes I think that is what love really is. Not rescuing someone, not changing who they are, simply giving them enough room to choose freely, and being grateful when they choose to stay. Elias never asked Rosemary to become smaller, so his life could feel bigger. Rosemary never asked Elias to forget the brother he loved, or the quiet years that shaped him. Together they proved that healing does not arrive all at once. It comes in repaired curtains, warm coffee on cold mornings, handwritten notes left on a kitchen table, and the steady comfort of knowing someone will still be there when the day is done. If you imagine yourself standing in that Wyoming valley, with the wind moving through the aspens and the wagon resting outside the barn, what would matter most to you? The land, the freedom, or the hand waiting for yours after a long winter? I'd love to know your answer, so share it in the comments. Perhaps that is the quiet miracle of this story. Shelter can keep a storm away for one night, but only trust can turn a house into a home. The roads that change our lives are rarely the straight ones. Often they are the wrong roads we never meant to travel, leading us toward the people we were always meant to find. If this journey stayed with you today, I hope you'll join me again. There are many more stories waiting just beyond the next ridge. Stories of courage, mystery, healing, and hearts that discover home where they least expect it. Until then, may God bless you, and may every road you travel lead you toward peace.